How's it going, Matt?
Everything is amazing.
Is it? You, you have your coffee yet today?
Uh, yeah, I just for brevity, sometimes I keep a stash of Stumptown Nitro. If you've listened to the Tech Village podcast, you know that I have a special place in my heart for Stumptown Nitro coffee, um, because it's very quick. It doesn't take any time to make. It's already in a can. You just pour it, and it's quite good. It kind of it's black coffee. People always kind of like black coffee, but uh, it's actually not bad. The nitro makes it, that gives it like a creamy mouthfeel, which is decent, and it looks like stout. And I'm not really drinking anymore, so this is like me living through my like past me. Like a stout was my first drink as a 21-year-old, so like a little bit of nostalgia built in there. Not to mention it's like 10 10:24 my time, so I can join meetings in the morning and be like, yeah, cheers, how's it going? And everybody freaks out. There's a bunch of hangups about drinking beer in the morning.
I
You go
don't
to the
have that.
UK and everybody's just like, yeah, and
Yeah. Yeah, it's a terrible hang up to have. Life is better when you can drink beer in the morning, for sure.
I have heard.
So, all right, we'll just assume that we have the viewers that we're gonna have for the time being. How about that? Um, Welcome to the Enery Labs live stream. We're this is our 1000th episode. Just kidding. It's not. Um, we're
Is
on
it
like
even our 10th yet?
no, I don't think so. I don't think we're even at number 10.
I think this might
Um,
be like 9 or something.
yeah,
Or no, this might be 10 actually.
yeah. Oh, I should.
What?
It's morning. It's our 10th episode. I should have a 10th anniversary beer. Um,
The last one was 9. This is number 10.
wow, that's good. That's worth
The
drinking.
one with you and Lisa was 9.
Sweet. Yeah, that was fun. I liked having her on. She'll
Yes,
be on again.
she's all right.
Yeah, she's she's all right. She's awesome. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I was winging this community manager thing. I was just reading blogs. I have a couple books that weren't super helpful, and then thank goodness for Lisa, man. Thank goodness.
That feels like a subject area that there wouldn't be many books on. Like
Yeah, there's
the
one.
nature of the work is much more like learn on the job kind of thing, or learn by being immersed in the community.
Yeah,
So like if you don't have a mentor, you kind of just have to try it, which I feel like that would suck. You should get a mentor. Like if you want to get involved
yeah,
in this stuff, like you really should have somebody like Lisa, like what she's doing, for you is like guidance through that.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's
It
absolutely.
would be kind of, I don't know, like I'm thinking on my feet here, but like it feels like something that wouldn't go well in a book just because everything's so very different from project to project. I don't know. I imagine that if you the more experience you have, the more some certain things become much more of a science than an art. I would expect that that would be the answer Lisa would give to that thought. She'd be like, "Oh, ignorant Matt, you think it's just something that you just do? No, you practice, you train."
I think it must be because she seems to know what she's doing. Her and Vicky,
They
and
have they've got to be like doing the equivalent of lifting weights every day for community management, whatever the equivalent is, like uh, lifting terms of service, not terms of service. That's the wrong term. I don't know. Or the opposite. Maybe they're burning like proprietary terms of service in effigy, and that's like their presentation or preparation for like getting involved with the community. Like, oh yeah, no, these proprietary things, let's burn them, and then that's their practice. Things are going on the deep end. Please take control back of the live stream because I don't know
no,
what
this is
I don't
fun.
know what
I
I'm
need you to
talking
keep
about.
going. This is good. um,
Okay, I'm gonna
all
shut
right,
up and start drinking more of this because I need it. Clearly I need it.
all right. So this is our 10th NRE Labs stream. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Cloud Toad, otherwise known as Derek. You can follow me on Twitter at CloudToad. And I am your host today, along with Matt Oswald at Meerden, Mierdin. And
Did you notice you spelled that wrong in the stream name?
did I? I do that every
Yep,
time.
did.
I do that every whatever. One day it'll stop. Um, And for this week's stream, uh, we are going to talk about Matt's adventures in Interop. For those of you that don't know, Interop in Las Vegas every year, there's a sort of network automation thing that happens. It's almost sort of a quasi-official network automation event. Uh, Interop is, and a whole bunch of people from all over the network automation community show up, and they commingle and are very polite and courteous to each other, and they talk about nerd stuff, automation. And so Matt went, and Matt is going to talk today while I listen about his experience there and some of the cool stuff he saw and how he thinks some of it relates back to Energy Labs. Right, Matt?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so just for some context, I started speaking at Interop fairly regularly back in 2015. Um, oh man, I don't remember even who originally reached out to me. I kind of feel bad about that actually because it was kind of a cool opportunity. Um, I did a workshop, my very first time at Interop. It was the first time attending as well as speaking. In fact, I don't know that I've ever gone to Interop and not had some sort of a speaking engagement, either minor or major. The first one was major because it was more of like a workshop. It was like a 3 hour workshop on at the time network automation with, oh man, Python and Ansible. It was a I held a 3 hour workshop on how to do that. Um, and and this has actually become a little bit foundational for me because I actually had produced as part of that workshop a big GitHub repo that I called NWK Auto, uh, network, short for network automation. And the idea was that I would just use that for my talk. I still get people starring that repo. I'm not sure how many stars it has, probably not a ton, but like I still get people forking it and starring it, and I haven't made a commit to that repo probably at least 2 3 years. I know I didn't make a ton of commits after the talk in general, but anyway, that was my first talk at Interop. It was a workshop. I think I had like that and maybe a smaller speaking thing that year. The next year, I released a project that I still want to work on. I actually still have things I want to do there called Todd. Um, so anyway, I've been going to Interop for a while, for a number of years now. Um, and what you just for some context on why I went this year, every once in a while, like it seems like every other year, there's like there's a so the way Interop works is it's a big multi-vendor conference. It used to be back in the day before I started going that it was used to test it for vendors to meet sort of in a neutral space and test interoperability between them, like when routing protocols were being developed, things like that. You connect them together and they'd interact with each other, and there would be like a proving ground kind of thing. I think they still have some of that, but it's definitely not the focus if it does exist. I certainly haven't seen it at any of the times that I've gone. Now it's more just kind of like a regular conference, but still multi-vendor. It's meant to be vendor agnostic. So the idea is that that conference more or less starts on the Wednesday of the week. Tuesday and Monday, the 2 days prior to the actual Interop conference, meaning like the general sessions and whatnot, like the keynote that kicks off the conference is on Wednesday.
Yeah.
But Monday and Tuesday are always have, and this has been true since I started going because I participated in this on my first year. Monday and Tuesday are workshops, and so the idea is that attendees would pay extra to go to one of these workshops. You'd basically pay for it, kind of like you'd pay for like a college course. It would be, the price of getting into Interop that gets you into the show, and all of the general sessions, like the 50-minute talks and things like that.
Yeah.
But then you pick the workshops that you want to go to that are on Monday and Tuesday, and they're some sort of a flat fee. Now, these could be 3 hour workshops, or some people, what they do is they say, like, look, I want like a mini summit. I'd like to allocate an entire room Monday and Tuesday and just go all out. The Packet Pushers did this last year or 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago. I went to that. I can't remember if no, they did have me. I spoke there as well. Um, and then also sometimes, and it could be a different person or a different company that's like sponsoring this. But Network to Code, we've talked about them on the stream before. They actually sponsored. a 2-day network automation summit, which was again Monday and Tuesday. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that people paid to get in that, and that's impressive if you consider how many people were there. It was often standing room only. In fact, almost all the time. Certainly the first day. So that's really cool. If again, it's cool regardless, but especially if people are paying extra to go there, kind of shows where people are where their heads are at. So that's what I went to. I went to, Jason, founder of Network to Code, reached out to me and asked if I would speak there. I was already going to Interop to speak at a sort of a regular session, like a 45-50 minute kind of thing. I did a talk on network reliability engineering with Michael Kehoe, who works at LinkedIn as an NRE. So he's very involved in this space. He's LinkedIn is we've actually got Russ White, who came from LinkedIn, so we have some connections there. And actually, I had some connections prior to Juniper because we did a lot of auto remediation stuff with them at Stackstorm. So it's just generally a really good team of folks to work with or to be associated with, and so that's what I was there for. Jason then reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you talk about something at the automation workshop?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really diving too much into NRE labs in our in my main talk on Wednesday. So what I could do is just make it a deep dive on how NRE labs works and then how you might contribute to it because the focus of the later talk wasn't necessarily NRE labs. It was much more broadly like NRE behaviors and things like that. And then we mentioned NRE labs at the end as a sort of takeaway. So that's what I did. It was for the automation summit. It was on Monday. It was like Monday afternoon, right after lunch. Um, and yeah, I went into a lot of detail, probably more detail than I ever have in like a talk setting, um, on the platform and how it works. I even talked a little bit about future stuff too. Like I redid the architecture diagram to be much more like what it will be instead of what it currently is. So it was a pretty good talk, and I think it was fairly well received.
Nice. Do you is all that so the NRE behaviors thing is that's interesting to me. Is that something that you have a firm recollection of? Because I'd love to hear that. I mean,
Sure.
or read about it anyways. You should write a blog, Matt.
Well, we have some of it, and this is much more the Brit Juniper kind of thing, but Juniper has like a what is page. We call it what is page. It basically lets you define certain terms. So we have a what is NRE page, and in that we have the 6 key behaviors. Now it's on Juniper's site, but just FYI, it doesn't really contain anything Juniper specific. It just happens to be on Juniper's site. Um, we will be going into much more detail on these key behaviors elsewhere, probably on the NRE Labs or on the NRE site because these are not. This is not Juniper specific. It's my big thing is, especially after reading books like the book Switch, or Influencers, which Jeremy Schulman put me on. It's pretty clear, due to some of the inherent ambiguity of what we talk about sometimes, that we need to be much more prescriptive with the things that the things that we advocate for people to do. Um, we tend to sort of beat around the bush a little bit when we talk about network automation because everybody's got different experiences. Um, so for me, it's about Uh, sorry, I'm getting messages. That's very distracting. Let me put that on the floor.
Yeah,
My vibrate function is like almost as loud as my ring function, which
we
is
had to
annoying.
ignore some things to do this stream.
Yes, this is important. Um, uh, no, but and it's a right because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be so prescriptive that you give the impression that there's only one way of doing things because that's obviously not true. But the problem is people tend to go all the way to the other side of the spectrum. If you've gone through automation and you're going through this exercise in your head, you're like, I want to get other people involved in automation. There, you can make things too ambiguous to a fault. Like you can make it so that you try to create this sense of flexibility in people's heads. Like, well, there's a bunch of ways to do something. That's great if they feel empowered to take action, if they still take empowered to take action. If you create this impression within people's minds that there's so many ways to do things, and that they feel like they got to boil the ocean and learn it all started, that has the opposite effect. in my mind. So the balancing act that we have to strike is being flexible and like conveying a sense of flexibility enough that people still feel empowered that they can build a solution that works for them, but not being so flexible and not being so open ended that they just never get started. And the balance that I like to strike is by just talking about behaviors. The specific thing that you will be different in your environment, but no matter what, it'll fit into one of these like five key behaviors. If you're doing something like what I'm describing, you're probably on the right track. And so that lets people move forward with some specifics, which we advocate for in NRE Labs. We certainly have content that like lets them do specific things. Um, but it also doesn't constrain them and say like this is the only thing you can do. Like you can play with it, you can build a solution, you can use a totally different tool if you want. That's not important. What's important is that you fit within some of these key behaviors that we feel are shared amongst anybody that has success in this space. Like anytime you look at a successful automation initiative, they tend to follow a pretty consistent pattern. Wildly different implementation details. This is my big thing when people talk about when people talk about Google, Facebook, what they do, and they immediately write it off because I'm not Google, Facebook. It's like sure you should write off mostly the implementation details, the things they're solving for at certainly with respect to scale, just not relevant to just about anybody else. But they still follow a pattern that is very much applicable to a lot of people, and those are the kind of behaviors and patterns that we like to suss out because that's the gold. That's the goal that we've been trying to get at for a long time.
Nice.
So that was my talk on Wednesday.
Okay.
Um, that was much more generic, not generic, but like more like behavioral and like if you're constructing a reliability engineering team or if you're thinking about getting into it, here are the kind of things that are probably going to be important to you. That was kind of the main gist of it. And then the automation summit that took place on Monday and Tuesday was about all kinds of stuff. I don't just mean my talk. It was there was a bunch of stuff, a bunch of different speakers that came up to talk about a bunch of different things. And then I, did a talk specifically around NRA Labs and how to get involved. The idea was that because there were a lot of people at that summit that knew automation more so than the rest of the conference, I felt like it was probably a good idea to solicit contributors there because a lot of people that run projects like this wasn't necessarily true this year. It was to a degree. So like Kirk Byers was there. He contributes to the Nornir project, and he also, famously is pretty much the head honcho for the NetMiko project.
Yeah.
So if you're doing automation on top of like Cisco, for instance, you probably run into NetMiko. Um, David Barroso has been at this kind of thing before. He wasn't there this year, but their Napalm project, I'm in charge of. He would say that he's just, he's nobody's really in charge of it, but he started it. So that's what I mean when I say that. So he started the Napalm project with a few other folks. Elisa Yasinska. It's been a long time since I had to pronounce her name, but yeah, Elisa. She and him when they worked at Spotify, they started that. So anyway, it's the thought behind this was there's like a confluence of people who run projects like this, or at least help start them and are helping to run them, and having those folks involved in the project is important to me. Not necessarily, I mean, obviously it'll help the project itself, but more than that, my talk, uh, the message that I was trying to communicate in that talk was the thing that drives us, which is we want to be, we're all about bright spot analysis. What's working in the industry that if only other people knew about it or if only other people had more experience with it, things would be a lot better rather than pockets of people having success and then the rest of the people around those pockets just kind of don't want to get started or feel like they can't get started. That's the problem we're looking to solve. So
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? Trying to get people to think a little bit differently about what automation is. Reliability is always, I mean, people respond so well to it. The behaviors thing you were saying earlier, people not knowing how to start, right? One of the things I find it's not that there's necessarily so many tools. There's lots of ways to do lots of things in networking. I think we're used to that.
yeah,
It's not understanding the nuances well enough between them to know what the limitations of each option is, right? So like for this particular workflow, how do I know which tool is going to be best for that? And or whatever, this particular workflow, this particular vendor, this particular network design. I mean, it can get kind of even very specific if you think about it. So that's one of the, I don't know. I'm injecting tangential nonsense into your stream of thought here.
I don't think it's tangential. No, I mean that's the thing, right? Like it's always a balancing act. The industry, it's a it's a small world, but it's also not. There's a lot of things going on, um, and I think people get wrapped up around details a little too much. Um, I think if you go in with if you go into any project, this is true not just of automation because more like on the software side of things than probably what a lot of people are used to dealing with. But I think I think if people get get wrapped up around details a little too much, and then when the details sort of don't match what the expectations were, they feel like they failed. I think you have to. It's kind of like I'm a new parent, so I'm going to give parenting advice. Um, it's like everybody assumes like that they you hear a lot of advice from other parents that were like, well, you're going to have to do this, and this is how this is going to work, and all of that. I I I've actually given some parenting advice to some people. Not ready to name names because I don't think they're ready to announce it, but some people that I know um, are going to be parents soon, and I've played that card where I'm like, oh, I'm a parent, so I'm gonna give you some advice. I always give one piece of advice, and I always give this context. I'm gonna give you some advice, and it's 100% true, and it's the only piece of advice that I'll ever give you. It's universally applicable. Here it is. All parenting advice is BS. Like, no one, first off, no one knows what they're doing the first time. And second off, everybody's situation is different. And that's certainly been true for me because I got a lot of advice before I had my daughter, and most of it was just not true. Like it just wasn't true. I had to figure a lot of stuff out on my own anyway. But see, that's the thing. Like if you go in with that mindset, bringing this around, if you go in with that mindset to any project that you undertake, um, you gotta be careful taking on too much detail because a lot of that detail just won't be true for you, and even if it is, it won't hit home for you nearly as much unless you figure it out yourself. Now that's not to say you should go in cold and not prepared. Certainly there are things you should do to prepare yourself, just like if you're having a kid, there's books you can read to help prepare you and put you in the mindset. Not advocating that you shouldn't do that. Similarly, you shouldn't just shut yourself off from the rest of the world and say, I'm going to do automation and I'm going to do it my way and just discover everything from scratch. Like you shouldn't do that. You should at least be aware of what other people are doing. But instead of going all the way to the other side of the spectrum and saying like, oh, so and so used Ansible and they used these modules, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Be careful, because a lot of that detail probably won't be relevant to you, and even if it is relevant to you, like I said, there's a certain amount of experience that's built up just by doing, and that's the more important thing. So the balance we like to strike is advocating for the generalized behaviors. Here are the patterns that you'll observe. And these five key behaviors that we talk about, we don't really mention a lot of tools because there's not really a point. It's not about the tools you use, it's about the behaviors that you exhibit while you're using them. That's the thing that I think we're missing in the industry is we get so wrapped up around tools. Um, and so the conversation then becomes all about tools. This is a little controversial because it's going to sound like I don't like Ansible. I it's not about not liking Ansible. It's about how wrapped up people are right now about this one particular tool. Um, Ansible's cool in the problem space that it was designed to solve, 100%. People try, and it's not just Ansible either. People this has been true of all kinds of other things in the past. It's just
every
Ansible's
every
the
single
is
tool,
the
man. I mean, every time a tool comes out,
exactly.
it's like, oh my god, it's the tool that's gonna do it. It's gonna do it. We're gonna have automation now,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
I,
not
I
just
actually raised I actually raised this on the second day. There was a panel at the very end of these 2 days, and I actually raised this question. Uh, I like to be a little bit controversial while maintaining respectfulness. So what I said was um, I actually said I talked to a lot of customers, a lot of people around the community, and I can count on one finger the number of people that do like network changes more than 15% of their day, like or their week. Um, Yet our hello world for network automation has been for 3 years has been making network changes with Ansible. And I actually asked the question. I said, is it time that we change the hello world of network automation, because it doesn't seem like it matches up with reality. People get involved in network automation and they get the impression that because the hello world is making network changes with Ansible, that must mean that everybody in network automation is doing nothing but changing configs. Um, but if you talk to people that are actually putting this into production, it's not true. They have the structure there for changing configs in an automated way, but that's almost it's a fairly minor feature of the overall picture. The things that they spend a lot more of their time on are things like visibility and troubleshooting. And there wasn't a good answer. I mean, I wasn't looking for an answer anyway. I mostly just wanted to remind people that there's more to this conversation than making network changes. And my motivation for doing that isn't to be thought leadery. It's actually much more because I feel like we inadvertently scare people away if we present this hello world to them that makes them think that they've got to be making a lot of changes uh, in order to find value here. Like if like the hello world, when you get into a programming language and you look for if you look for hello world examples, and for those that don't know, hello world is like the thing you do first in any really technology, frankly, but it's typically in a programming language. The first thing you should do is write the smallest amount of code possible necessary to print the words hello world. That doesn't make you an expert in the language by any stretch, but it teaches you enough about the language that you know that you have a starting point. It's like that first thing that you do when you're learning a new language. When I was learning Go, that's what I did. I declared package main, function main, and then or import FMT, and then fmt.println quote hello world. That's And in Python it's something similar. And for us, if our hello world in network automation, meaning the very first thing that we tell people if they don't know anything about network automation, the very first thing we show them is here's how to use Ansible to make configuration changes en masse on your network in a templated fashion. Um, that's a lot. First off, that's a lot to learn. Ansible and all of the dependencies therein, templating languages and YAML, like all of these things, like you have to learn before you get to a hello world of network automation. Uh, Not to mention, even if that wasn't true, even if it was fairly easy to learn, it sets the expectation that, oh, you're teaching me something that will allow me to make changes in an automated fashion. That must be the most valuable thing I can learn. That must for everybody that's involved in network automation, that must be the thing that they've invested time in, because they have to do that so often. Then then people that are getting involved are looking at that and they're like, well, hold on, if that's true, then I must not be like a cultural fit for this community, because I don't make changes that much. In fact, I'm not allowed to make changes that much. I'm relegated to an hour or two every other weekend or every other month to make changes. So there's a mismatch here. I
Yeah,
must not be a network automation candidate,
yeah,
because the reality that's being painted for me inadvertently, nobody's explicitly saying this, but because they're presenting that initial hello world example that places certain assumptions on what the use case is, there's this cultural mismatch, and that pains me, because I know that means we're turning people away, like full stop. Like there are people that want to get involved in this stuff. They hear about network automation and then they get that hello world example and they're like, look, learning all of this doesn't seem worth it, because the outcome seems to be based on people who make a ton of changes, and I just don't. What that means is I'm going to go back to what I know,
yeah.
and I don't like that.
Yeah, I agree. It's not just in network automation that this is an issue. In a lot of tech automation, you know, there's in OpenStack, it's for instance, there was not a lot of visibility into what's going on with some of the components, and people would say, I'd like more visibility, I'd like to get status, I'd like to know what's going on, when I go to, create this project or something, and it's going to filter down into a bunch of elements being created in the, under the control of OpenStack. I'd like to know, what how that's happening and what the status of it is at a granular level, something more than than what's available. And the whole mentality for a long time, I don't think it's this way anymore, but for the longest time was you don't need that. Like, if everything is just configured correctly the first time, everything is magic. It just works.
Hmm.
And it's just kind of shocking to me, like, because that's not true anywhere else in the world. And there's no other engineering field where you don't care about the state of the system because you press the right sequence of buttons. That's all you need to know.
Okay.
And it's passed a semantic check. That's exactly the opposite of what network engineers need. And we know that this is true. You can type all kinds of commands that are semantically correct and will be taken by a router or switch and will not have the effect you want. So, visibility and the ability to sort of model what's going on in the network is it kind of belies this traditional way of thinking about automation. But for some reason, it's infected a lot of people's minds. If
Yeah.
only everything like I said, when I type in these commands and semantically they're okay and they get submitted, then everything's going to be fine. And that's just not that's not it's not going to work for us in this field.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think bringing it back to interop, I should say, I should say the the automation workshop that took place on Monday and Tuesday isn't it's not built into interop. It's not like something that's a given. It's kind of a yearly thing where they evaluate like who gets involved, and people obviously have to propose to be involved in the first place.
Sure.
um, my understanding was that none of that happened last year. I didn't go last year. It was the first time I hadn't gone since I started going. uh, I will say, and I also don't want this to come across as lashing, because it's not. That's not my intent. Interop seems the attendance at Interop has seems to decline pretty rapidly over the past few years. Um, I don't I know that they, and this is all speculation. I hear certain things about they're trying to pivot to not a totally different audience, but a slightly more like leadership kind of style. So maybe that, and certainly there's fewer of those people in the industry. So that's probably one of the reasons. Um, uh, so I will say, if you're looking for a multi-vendor, Interop's still, frankly, the only real one. If you're sold on conferences still, I'm much more in favor of like smaller meetup kind of things, which are inherently multi-vendor if you go to the right ones anyway. But if you still want to go to that like big conference kind of thing, or like if you feel super compelled to spend all your time in Las Vegas, um, then Interop's great. It's the only multi-vendor conference of its size, and I don't mean to say that it's small. It's certainly not. It's just a little smaller than in the past few years. Probably a byproduct of the sort of audience shifts that they're looking for, is my expectation. I will also say, don't assume you're going to get a network automation summit every year, because you probably won't. I would look ahead of time if that's what you're interested in. If you're looking to go to Interop to learn network automation, look on the schedule for Monday and Tuesday. If there's a company like Network to Code, maybe packet pushers will go back at some point. I don't think they have plans to do anything in the future, but I'm obviously speculating there. You'd have to ask them. The point I'm trying to convey is it's kind of it just depends on the year. Depends on what people are doing. Interop itself doesn't have like a network automation track. It's all about people who like network to code, for instance. If they're like, well, we want to sponsor a workshop focused on network automation, then awesome, go to that, because it was good. It was a lot, like I said, a lot of people talking about a lot of different things. The hallway track, as always, is usually pretty good there. um, so if that's your interest, just be aware that it's not a given that you'll have the same experience. Check first, and if somebody is sponsoring something like what I went to, then yeah, give it a shot. But it's sort of like co-resident with Interop. It's not necessarily built into Interop. There's not really like a network automation track. And actually, there's not a. This is another weird thing. Given that I know Interop's history, there's not even really a networking track either. They kind of got rid of that. So they've been making some pivots lately. It's very different from what it used to be. If you've gone to Interop before, then you'll probably notice the same differences that I've noticed.
Hmm.
But specifically with network automation, yeah, I would say it's worth it if you're looking to meet with other people that are involved with network automation. It's still one of those things. Again, as long as somebody is sponsoring the track and it exists, then it usually attracts a lot of people in the community, and it'll be a good time. But just don't expect it. Do your research ahead of time and see what's there, and sign up if it's there. If not, wait until the next year probably.
We should do an Enery Labs event in Siberia so we can go ice fishing.
In Siberia, okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we'll get a ton of attendance.
People people do it all the time. It's not it's totally possible.
Yeah, I I I like maintaining possession of my personal electronic devices when I come into the U.S. across the border. Um, if I'm flying back from Siberia, I don't know that that's given, so I'm going to let you make that trip, and I'll stay here in the comfort of my own country.
We have though talked about Enery Labs events, and I know that we've been trying to get some going. This is something we should definitely talk about on our upcoming community stand-up meeting next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so
yeah,
this could be an agenda item. When can we do some NRE events? I know we have an NRE event that Dave G runs in the UK. He does it once a quarter, right, or so.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think I mean, there's interest. We should do it.
yeah. And actually, that reminds me of a few things. I signed up for a meetup account to have an NRE meetup in Portland, here in Portland. Um, uh, I met with some folks. So there's a guy who works for this startup called IntentionNet. They run the Batfish project. They're going to get involved with NRE Labs hopefully at some point pretty soon. So I'm pretty excited about that. But uh, uh, they also expressed interest in helping out with a meetup, and they're in Seattle. So I'm thinking about actually, or not thinking about, but I've uh, solicited help from a few other folks that are up near Seattle, further up north into Vancouver territory. And we're probably going to do like a Pacific Northwest NRE meetup, and it'll rotate through the sort of major cities in the area. So pretty excited about that, and of course because of the broader scope, I'm hoping attendance will be, pretty good on those. Um, uh, I will be relying heavily on the other people in the group to help organize that, because right now I'm pretty slammed, but hopefully soon that'll manifest itself. The other thing you mentioned the community planning meeting. Are we doing that weekly or every other week? I can't remember.
It's the community. We're calling it the community stand-up, and it's
Community
every
stand up.
week. It's every week. There'll
Cool.
be regularly occurring agenda items which we'll finalize, and then we can talk about the agenda itself as well on the first one. We're just
Yeah, I
gonna
was
we're gonna wing the first agenda, but then part of the agenda is a section to talk about the agenda for the next meeting. So, um,
nice. You can't have a meeting without talking about the next
yes, correct.
meeting. I was also thinking last night. It might be useful for us to have like open office hours for people that are wanting to develop lessons. Um, I don't know that like weekly would probably be too much, but maybe like every other week or frequent, maybe like a long period of time every once a month, or maybe a shorter period of time every 2 weeks. We'll figure that out.
Okay.
But basically, open office hours to just help people like with no agenda. Just come in, and if you have questions with your lesson, join the Zoom call. We'll throw up a Zoom meeting or something like that. You join or leave as you want, and Toad and I will be there or one of us will be there to help get past like certain hurdles in the lesson building experience. Sometimes people are building lessons and they're just like cranking out like the markdown content. That stuff's pretty easy, but then they run into some sort of a barrier, and if you just need help getting past it, sometimes in person works pretty well. So I was thinking about that. Maybe we should do like an open office hours kind of thing too, just to help people get past these hurdles.
Yeah, I think we should do it, and we should in fact solicit help from the community to conduct that. For instance, I think I'm going to reach out to Brian Linkletter. He wrote this really great blog, in fact, about how to create lessons. He just published it, I think, yesterday or the day before.
Yeah,
And why don't Matt? Can you pull that up? I can't.
there we go. So yeah, so Brian's actually written about NRA Labs before. If you scroll down, actually, you can find the or rather, if you go to his the main page, you can see he wrote before install the how to install it effectively using self medicate. But he wrote yesterday a post on creating lessons, which is awesome. And he even talks about like some of the details on like where how the lesson directory is structured, things like that. Um, he also he's commented on some of the issues I've created to the lesson definition, which I'll probably go over in much more detail next week once it's finished. But he does give a nice warning here. Um, Warning: fast moving project. It's totally true.
Yeah, we do have some really exciting changes happening to the lesson definition that open up some interesting capabilities. So please tune in next week for sure to hear about that. And a lot of it is driven by feedback we got from community members. So I think this is going to be it's going to be a fun stream, and I can't wait for these changes to take effect. 'Cause it's going to open up a lot of possibilities for what we can build for lessons.
Yeah, yeah. In particular, it's just kind of showing its age a little bit. So I'll go over that next week.
But Brian, Brian, Linkletter, Linkletter.com. Go to his website. He now has a few posts about NRE Labs up that are high quality posts. And if you want to learn about how to contribute, how to set up the development environment, um, then go there and read his blog posts because they're good. They're accurate until the next release. All right. Well, we've been going about 45 minutes, so I think we're going to first put it up. There's 4 people watching this time, not as many as usual. But if any of them have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat. I'll give you a couple minutes. Um, I will say again, please join the community stand-up meeting next Tuesday at 8 a.m. The details on how to join that are in a forum post on community.networkreliability.engineering. It's the banner post. It should be at the top of the page, and they'll tell you how to join the discussion. Um, please follow us on Twitter at NRE Labs. Again, at CloudToad, and Mirden at Mierdin. Please follow all of us. Join our discourse forum at community.networkreliability.engineering, and also join our Discord, which is our chat server. Which the specific directions how to do that are in the project documentation. So
When
um,
it's funny when you say join our Discord, it makes it sound like join the Discord that we're trying to seed, like we're revolting against the government and we're
yeah,
soliciting people to
Discord
join
is our
us.
chat server. But yeah, please feel. I don't
Please
know.
join our rebellion.
Yes, and yeah, and again, join us next week to hear about the changes that are going to be happening. So, but we interact with the community a lot. There's things that we, talk about when there's any major issues get resolved, that kind of thing. We talk about it. So, you get a lot more detailed sort of view of what's going on all the time on those in all those social media places. Um, yeah, so please join. There's it would appear there are no questions. So with that, thank you very much, Matt. Anything you'd like to say?
No, that's it. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll talk to you next week.
Excellent. Take care.